I moved into this house 6 months ago alone after a rough breakup. It was cheap, too cheap for the size and location, but I needed the solitude. It was an old house, creaky and drafty, the kind where every gust of wind makes the walls groan like a dying thing. The first time I heard the whispering, I was half asleep. A faint, sibilant murmur like a conversation just beyond the range of understanding. I told myself it was the house settling, maybe the wind slipping through the cracks, but in the following weeks, it happened more often. Late at night, just as I was drifting off, I would hear it, a hushed voice, low and urgent, speaking right from the walls. At first, I ignored it. Old houses make noise. That's what I told myself. But then, one evening while reading in the living room, I heard it again. This time, it wasn't a single whisper. It was two, maybe more, overlapping and urgent, just behind the drywall. I froze, my skin prickling. The voices didn't fade, they continued, murmuring in a cadence that almost felt deliberate. I pressed my ear to the wall, but the moment I did, they stopped. Over the next few nights, it got worse. Sometimes I would wake up in the dead of night, my room suffocated by silence, until I heard it again. A voice just behind my headboard. Whispering. I barely breathed, straining to hear. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. It was urgent. Insistent. One night, I reached my limit. Armed with a flashlight and a screwdriver, I decided to check inside the wall. The house had been renovated years before, but I had never examined the panels too closely. The whispering had been getting louder in the hallway outside my bedroom, so that's where I started. My hands trembled as I unscrewed the panel, peeling it away. Behind it was darkness. A narrow gap between the drywall and the original wooden slats of the house. I ran the flashlight over the space, nothing but dust, wiring, a few dead insects. But then something glinted. I moved the light and my breath caught in my throat. A hole. A small, deliberate crack in the wood. And behind it something pale. I leaned closer, the flashlight trembling. It was an eye. A human eye. Bloodshot. Wide open. Staring right at me. I stumbled back, the flashlight slipping from my fingers, clattering onto the hardwood. My stomach twisted in a way that made me want to vomit. My breath hitched in my throat as I scrambled backward. I waited for movement. For someone to shift behind the wall. But nothing happened. The eye just stared, unblinking. I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed, before I forced myself to move. I grabbed the flashlight and, with a shaking hand, shined it back toward the crack. Empty. Nothing but darkness. The eye was gone. I swallowed hard, my skin slick with cold sweat. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe it was just a trick of the light. But I knew, deep in my bones, that it wasn't. There was someone in my walls. I barely slept that night. Every sound in the house made my skin crawl. The whispering had stopped, but that was almost worse. The silence felt wrong, like something was waiting, watching. I locked my bedroom door and left the hallway light on, but even then, I lay in bed, gripping the sheets, my pulse hammering in my ears. Every so often, I swore I could hear movement, soft, deliberate shuffling inside the walls. By morning, I convinced myself that I had imagined the eye. Maybe it had been a trick of the light. Maybe I was overtired. Maybe. But I knew deep down that wasn't true. Still, I had to do something. I went to the hardware store and bought a hammer, some nails, and extra drywall. I wasn't sure what I was planning to do, but the idea of that hole, that hidden space behind the wall, made my stomach churn. I had to seal it. That afternoon, I pried the panel open again, half expecting the eye to be there, waiting. It wasn't. Just the dark, empty void. I forced myself to examine the space more closely this time. The crack in the wooden slats wasn't natural, it had been carved out deliberately. The edges were rough, as if done with something dull. A knife? A chisel? I shined the flashlight deeper inside. The space extended further than I had realized, almost a full crawl space running alongside the wall, just a couple of feet wide. I had assumed the walls were solid, but whoever had built this house had left something unfinished, some forgotten gap. My hand tightened on the flashlight. A part of me wanted to reach inside, to feel around, but I couldn't make myself do it. My nerves were stretched too thin. Instead, I grabbed a piece of plywood and nailed it over the hole, then reattached the drywall, working quickly, ignoring the way the back of my neck prickled with the feeling of being watched. That night, I slept with the TV on for background noise, anything to drown out the quiet. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't hear whispering. But just as I was beginning to drift off, something knocked from inside the wall. Not loud. Not frantic. Just a soft, deliberate knock. My blood ran cold. I squeezed my eyes shut, refusing to move, refusing to breathe. Then, in the silence, I heard it. A voice. Close. Too close. Why did you close it? A whisper, right against the wall. I bolted upright, heart slamming into my ribs. I fumbled for the lamp, my hands shaking so badly I almost knocked it over. Light flooded the room. The whispering stopped. I sat there, panting, every hair on my body standing on end. I didn't move for what felt like hours. Eventually, morning came. And that's when I saw it. The panel I had nailed shut? It was open. Not pried off, not broken, just unscrewed. As if someone had carefully, patiently removed each nail, one by one. I left the house that morning and didn't come back until it was dark. I didn't want to be there. But it was my home. I had to face it. Or at least, that's what I told myself. Because no matter where I went, no matter how much time I spent away, I knew something was waiting for me inside those walls. And it wasn't done with me yet. I didn't go near the wall that night, didn't even look at it, but I felt it, the wrongness, the weight of something just behind it, something pressing close, waiting, and no matter how much I tried to distract myself, blaring the TV, keeping every light on, I could feel its presence like a cold breath on my skin. Sleep was out of the question, my body coiled with tension, listening, waiting, and then, sometime past midnight, the whispering started again, but this time it wasn't just random murmurs, this time I could make out words, low and urgent, come back, we see you. And then, a scratching sound, slow and deliberate, like fingernails dragging along the inside of the drywall, moving closer, inch by inch, until it was right beside me, right at the edge of my bed. I wanted to move, to run, to do anything, but I was frozen, stiff with terror, and then, as if it knew, the voice whispered, "Why did you close it?" Right against the wall, just inches from my head, and the drywall bulged just slightly, as if something was pressing against it from the other side. I bolted upright, scrambled out of bed, heart hammering so hard I thought I might pass out, and that's when I saw it. The panel, the one I had nailed shut, was loose again, the nails scattered on the floor like discarded teeth, the plywood splintered at the edges. And there was something dark smeared on it, something that looked like fingerprints. I ran, didn't think, just ran, out of my room, down the hallway, but as soon as I reached the living room, I stopped because the whispering was coming from everywhere now, not just the wall in my bedroom, but from behind the living room walls, the ceiling, the floorboards beneath my feet, a chorus of hushed, urgent voices, overlapping, frantic, and in the dim light, I saw the vents along the walls, the small gaps where air should have flowed, but instead, I saw movement inside, a shifting. Darkness, something pulling away from the openings, retreating, hiding, but watching, always watching. I didn't sleep. I didn't move. I just sat there, knees pulled to my chest, listening as the whispers faded just before dawn, as if whatever was inside the walls only had power in the dark. The moment the sun rose, I grabbed my phone, called a contractor, told him I needed a full inspection, needed to know what the hell was inside my walls, and when he arrived that afternoon, I could tell from the look on his face that he thought I was crazy. But I didn't care, I needed someone else to see, to confirm that I wasn't losing my mind. He started in the bedroom, pried open the panel with a crowbar, and I braced myself for what he would find, but as the wall came open, all that was there was darkness, dust, empty space. "Nothing here," he muttered, shining his flashlight inside, reaching in to tap the wooden slats, testing for rot, and I exhaled, the fear twisting into something worse, confusion, doubt, but then he frowned, leaned in closer, and said, "Hang on, what the hell is this?" I took a step forward, heart pounding, watched as he reached into the gap and pulled something out, something small and brittle and yellowed with age. A bone. A human finger bone. My stomach lurched, nausea rising, and before I could say anything, he reached in again, pulled out more, a handful of tiny bones, fragments of something long buried, and then he stopped, went still, and I saw the color drain from his face. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, and I followed his gaze to the back of the crawlspace where something was carved deep into the wooden slats, something crude and desperate, scratched over and over as if by weak, frantic hands. "We see you. We see you. We see you." Over and over, dozens, maybe hundreds of times, gouged into the wood with what looked like fingernails. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat, but the contractor kept staring, flashlight shaking slightly in his grip, and then, so quiet I almost didn't hear, he muttered, "There's more." I didn't want to know. I didn't want to see. But I couldn't stop myself. I leaned in, followed the beam of his flashlight to a section of the wood near the floor, and beneath all the frantic scratches, there was one last carving, deeper than the rest, more deliberate. We never left. And then, from somewhere deep inside the walls, something moved. Something heavy. Something breathing. The contractor cursed under his breath, scrambled back, dropping his flashlight, and I just stood there, my body frozen in place, every nerve screaming for me to move, to run, but I couldn't take my eyes off that message. Off those words gouged into the wood, we never left, and before I could even process what was happening, the sound came again, deeper now, closer, a slow, deliberate shifting inside the walls, something dragging itself through the crawlspace, something alive, and then knock knock knock. Right behind the wood. Just inches from us. A slow, deliberate knocking. The contractor turned to me, face pale as a corpse, mouth moving but no sound coming out, and I finally found my voice, rasping, "We need to go." He nodded, too quickly, grabbed his tools, and bolted out of the room, and I was right behind him, slamming the bedroom door shut as if that would do anything, but the moment we hit the hallway, the whispers started again, not just from the bedroom now, but from everywhere, from inside the walls, above us, beneath us, a rising, overlapping chorus, frantic, pleading, angry, and then bang. The bedroom door shuttered behind me like something had slammed into it from the other side. I didn't stop, didn't look back, just ran for the front door, the contractor already outside, fumbling for his keys, and just as I reached the threshold, I heard it, my name. A whisper, soft, drawn out, coming from the walls, the floor, the ceiling, as if the house itself was saying it, as if whatever was inside it knew me. I slammed the door behind me and didn't look back. The contractor refused to go back inside, sat in his truck, hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles were white, and when I asked him what the hell was in my walls, he shook his head, muttered, "I don't know, man, I don't know, but you need to leave. You need to get the hell out of there," and I wanted to, God, I wanted to, but I couldn't, I had nowhere else to go, this was my house, my home, and even as I sat there in my car, staring at the dark windows, the gaping door, I knew. It wasn't done with me. That night, I didn't sleep, didn't even go inside, just sat in my car, watching, waiting, and at some point, sometime past midnight, I saw it, a shadow moving behind the upstairs window, a shifting shape just beyond the glass, watching me. My stomach turned to ice. There was someone inside my house. But that wasn't possible. The doors were locked. No one had gone back in. And then slowly, so slowly, the shadow moved, the shape drifting away from the window, disappearing back into the house, and I knew it wasn't someone. It was something. By dawn, I made my decision. I was leaving. I didn't care about the house, about my things, about anything, I just needed to go. I grabbed my keys, stepped out of the car, and the second I put my foot on the porch, the whispering started again. A low, rising chorus, growing louder, closer, like 1,000 voices pressed just behind the walls, and then the door swung open. On its own. Waiting. I didn't move, didn't breathe, my body locked in place, and then, from the darkness inside, I heard it knock knock knock. From the walls. From the floors. From everywhere. And then, right behind me, a whisper in my ear. "You can't leave." I ran. I don't remember getting in my car, don't remember starting the engine, all I know is that I was suddenly speeding down the road, my hands shaking so badly I could barely keep hold of the wheel, my mind screaming at me to never go back, never go back. Never go back, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that even as I put miles between me and that house, something had followed me. And now, even in my new apartment, in a building far from that house, I still hear it. At night, when everything is quiet, I hear it in the walls. The whispering. The knocking. And my name. Because they never left. And now they never will. The first thing I noticed when I moved in was the smell, not bad, not overwhelming, just old. Like damp wood and dust that had settled for decades, untouched. The house had been sitting vacant for years, the realtor told me something about the previous owners passing away, no family to claim it. Cheap, too good to be true, but I didn't care. I needed a fresh start, and this place, this quiet, isolated house at the edge of town, seemed perfect. At first, it was just little things, the feeling of being watched, the occasional creak when the air was still, a slight unease when I walked the hallways at night. But old houses settle, they shift, they breathe. I ignored it. Until I started the renovations. The wallpaper had to go first. It was old, peeling in places, some of it already curling at the edges, revealing cracked, discolored plaster beneath. I set up a stepladder in the living room and started scraping, my hands working methodically, pulling away layers of paper that crumbled in my grip. That's when I saw it. Beneath the paper, the walls weren't just cracked, they were scratched. Long, jagged claw marks dug deep into the plaster, as if someone had raked their nails over and over, desperate to get out. My stomach tightened, but I told myself it had to be from an animal, maybe an old pet that had been trapped in the house, something logical, something normal. I kept going, scraping away more, moving along the wall, and then, just near the corner, I saw something else, words. Carved into the wall, deep enough that the plaster had crumbled around the letters, like someone had etched them with shaking hands. I leaned in, running my fingers over the uneven grooves, my breath catching in my throat as I read. Don't change this place. We're still here. I jerked back, my heart slamming into my ribs, my breath coming fast and shallow. The letters were deep, deliberate, and old, the edges of the carvings worn, faded, like they had been there for years, waiting beneath the wallpaper, hidden from sight. I told myself it was a prank, maybe kids had broken in long ago, left messages to scare off anyone who moved in. But when I peeled back more wallpaper, I found more scratches. More carvings. All over the room. Some of them words, stop. Don't. Leave it alone. Others just frantic, erratic scratches as if someone had tried really tried to dig their way through the walls with their bare hands. I stepped back, suddenly aware of the silence around me, the way the air felt thick, heavy, charged with something unseen. And then, a sound. A soft, dragging sound. From inside the wall. I turned, every muscle in my body locking up, my ears straining. At first, I thought I had imagined it, the wind maybe, the house settling, and then it came again. A slow, deliberate scraping. Like fingernails. From inside the wall. I dropped the scraper, backing away, my breath coming fast, and as I did, the room suddenly felt wrong. The air colder. The shadows longer. And then, just as I reached the doorway, something whispered. Soft. Right behind me. Don't change it. I ran. I didn't go back into the living room that night, didn't even go near it, just shut the door and locked it like that would do anything, like a simple lock could keep something inside the walls from reaching me, but I could still feel it, that heavy, pressing sensation. Like the house was holding its breath, watching, waiting, and I lay in bed with my heart pounding, every creak of the wood making me flinch, every whisper of wind against the windows setting my nerves on edge, and then somewhere. In the house, a soft thud. I sat up, pulse hammering, listening, straining, but the sound didn't come again, and I told myself it was nothing, the house settling, just like I always did, but I knew, and when I finally closed my eyes, exhaustion pulling me under. I dreamed of walls splitting open, of hands reaching out from the cracks, clawing, grasping, and a voice whispering don't change it over, and when I woke up drenched in sweat, my first thought was it didn't feel like a dream. The next morning, I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I wasn't going to let some scratches on a wall scare me out of my own home, so I forced myself to go back into the living room, sunlight spilling in through the windows making everything feel normal. Safe until I saw the wallpaper. The sections I had stripped away last night? They were back. Perfectly in place. No sign that I had touched them at all. My stomach dropped. That wasn't possible. It wasn't possible. I reached out, ran my fingers along the edges, felt the brittle texture of old paper, and then my breath caught, my throat tightening because beneath my fingertips it was warm. Like body heat. Like someone was behind it. I stumbled back, every instinct screaming at me to run, to get out, to burn this house to the ground, but I didn't because some sick, twisted part of me needed to know, needed proof that I wasn't losing my mind, so I grabbed the scraper again, set my jaw, and peeled back the wallpaper, and beneath it the scratches were gone. No claw marks, no carvings, nothing but smooth, untouched plaster. Like it had never been there. My whole body went cold, my vision swimming, because I had seen it, I had felt it, and yet nothing. The words, the warning, they had been erased. My breath came in short, sharp bursts, panic clawing up my throat, and then, from somewhere deep in the house, a soft, shuffling sound, slow and deliberate, like footsteps. I turned sharply, scanning the empty room, my mind racing, I'm alone, but it didn't feel like I was alone, and then, from behind the wall, right where the carvings had been, a single, deliberate knock. My stomach flipped, my hands trembling, and then, in that same, low whisper so close it could have been right against my ear, we told you not to change it. I didn't scream, didn't run, didn't do anything because my body wouldn't let me, because my breath was trapped in my chest like a stone, my skin cold and tight as if something was pressing against it, as if the air itself had weight, and I knew it. If I turned around, if I moved too fast, something would be there, something waiting just beyond my sight, something that had been watching me since the moment I stepped into this house. The knock still echoed in my ears, that slow, deliberate sound, but worse was the whisper, we told you not to change it, like a voice slipping through the cracks in reality, like something that had been here long before me and would be here long after. Something that didn't want to be disturbed, something that had never left. I forced myself to move, to breathe, to push away from the wall and stagger back into the hallway, my legs numb, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the doorknob as I pulled the door shut behind me, sealing whatever was inside that room away. But the moment the latch clicked, I heard it again, not just from the living room, but from everywhere. Scraping. Soft at first, barely a whisper, but growing louder, 1,000 fingernails dragging, clawing, scratching, and I realized with a sickening jolt that it wasn't just one wall, it was all of them. The floors, the ceiling, the hallways, every inch of this house was breathing with movement, shifting, writhing beneath its skin like something buried alive and desperate to get out. I stumbled backward, my head swimming, the sound pressing against me from all sides, and then, just as suddenly as it had started, silence. Heavy, suffocating silence, like the house was listening, waiting for me to make the next move, and I knew I knew if I stayed, if I hesitated for even a second, it would start again, and this time it wouldn't stop. I ran. I don't remember grabbing my keys, don't remember the front door slamming behind me, don't remember getting into my car and peeling out of the driveway so fast my tires skidded on the pavement, but the next thing I knew, I was halfway across town. My pulse hammering in my ears, my hands aching from gripping the steering wheel so hard, my body still locked in that primal, bone-deep terror, and even though I was miles away, even though the house was nowhere in sight, I still felt it. I still felt it. I checked into a motel that night, kept the lights on, the TV on, anything to fill the silence, but no matter how much I tried to distract myself, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it, the scratches, the words, the walls shifting like something was inside them, waiting, watching. And then, just as I started to drift into an uneasy sleep, something woke me up. A feeling. A presence. The unmistakable, gut-wrenching sensation of being watched. My breath hitched, my skin prickling, and slowly, so slowly, I turned my head toward the motel room wall and saw a crack. A thin, jagged crack running down the plaster like a scar, like a wound, and in the dim, flickering light of the TV, I saw something move behind it. A shadow. A shape. An eye. Watching me. I didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink, because I knew, God, I knew, it had followed me. The house. It doesn't want me to leave. And now? It never will. The first time I noticed it, I barely gave it a second thought, just a weird feeling when I woke up, the sheets slightly pulled back, the pillow dented like someone had been lying there beside me, but I lived alone, no pets, no one else with a key. So I smoothed the blankets, adjusted the pillows, and chalked it up to restlessness, to the way I must have moved in my sleep, but the next morning it happened again, the sheets bunched on one side, the mattress subtly indented like the weight of a body had been there, like someone had shifted beside me in the night and then simply left. My chest tightened, my skin prickling with unease, but I ignored it, forced myself to think logically. Maybe I was sleepwalking, maybe I was moving more than I realized, maybe I was just imagining things, but then, the third night, I woke up cold. My blanket half on the floor, my pillow at the very edge of the bed, and this time I felt it, the unmistakable warmth in the space beside me, the faintest trace of heat lingering in the sheets, fresh, recent, like someone had just been there. My breath hitched, my pulse a slow, creeping drumbeat of dread, and I sat up, scanning the dark room, ear straining for any sound, any shift of movement, but the apartment was still, silent, empty except for me, and yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't. That whatever had been in my bed was still here. I barely slept after that, kept a light on, stayed curled up on my side, forcing myself not to turn over, not to check, because I was afraid, so afraid, that if I did, I would see someone lying there, someone I couldn't explain. Someone that wasn't supposed to exist, and by the fourth night, I had had enough. I needed proof, needed to know that I wasn't going crazy, so I set up my phone on my nightstand, propped it against a book, started recording before I went to sleep, forcing my body to relax. Forcing myself to drift off despite the gnawing anxiety in my gut, and when I woke up the next morning, the sheets were rumpled again, the pillow beside me sunken, the familiar, lingering warmth fading from the fabric, and I grabbed my phone with shaking hands. My breath shallow, heart hammering as I opened the video, scrubbed through the footage, fast-forwarding through hours of stillness, of nothing, of me just lying there, but then, sometime around 3:12 a.m., the blanket moved. Not all at once, not like it had been pulled or kicked off, but slow, deliberate, sliding downward inch by inch as if an invisible hand was peeling it away, and my stomach twisted, bile rising in my throat as I kept watching. My fingers tightening around the phone because I could see the mattress shifting. Indenting. Sinking like the weight of a body was pressing into it, like someone was getting out of bed. But there was no one there. Nothing. Just the blanket sliding away, the empty space beside me dipping under a presence I couldn't see, couldn't feel, couldn't explain, and then the pillow moved. A slow, subtle press, like the weight of a head shifting, like someone was turning over, getting comfortable, and that's when I saw it, the thing that made my breath stop, my blood turn to ice, the faintest imprint of a hand pressing down on the sheets right beside me. I dropped the phone, scrambled back, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps as if the air had thickened around me, my body cold, my skin prickling with something I didn't want to name because I had seen it, the way the sheets indented. The way the pillow shifted, the faint, impossible imprint of a hand pressing into the fabric beside me, and I wasn't alone. I had never been alone. Something had been lying next to me, night after night, pressing against me, sharing my bed, and I had never known. My hands shook as I picked up the phone again, forcing myself to keep watching, even though every instinct screamed at me to stop, to throw the phone across the room, to never look at it again, but I had to see, I had to know, and as the video played, I saw it. 3:12 a.m., the blanket moving, the slow shift of the mattress, the hand pressing down, and then, movement. The shape of the sheets rippled, like someone shifting under them, like a body stretching, adjusting, settling back into place, and then, for a few minutes, nothing, just me lying there, oblivious, unmoving until my breathing changed. I was still asleep, but I saw it, the way my body stiffened slightly, the way my head twitched, like something had disturbed me, and then the sheets lifted again. Slowly, gently. And I saw the imprint of fingers. 5 long, slender fingers curling around the edge of the blanket, pulling it down, exposing more of me, exposing my throat, my chest, and even through the grainy footage, I could see the slight change in the way I breathed, my face twitching, reacting. But I didn't wake up, I didn't even stir, as if something was keeping me still, keeping me asleep. My mouth went dry, my pulse hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. Because the movement didn't stop. The fingers released the blanket and pressed against the mattress instead. A slow, deliberate push, like someone bracing themselves as they leaned in closer. And then, suddenly, my hair moved. Just a slight shift, like the whisper of a breeze, like something or someone had leaned over me, exhaling against my skin. And I had felt it in my sleep, but not enough to wake up. And then, the whisper. Low. Right against my ear. I didn't hear it in the video, but I saw it. My reaction. The way my face twitched, the way my body tensed for just a fraction of a second, the way my fingers curled ever so slightly, reacting to something I hadn't been aware of. I stopped the video, threw the phone onto the bed, and I sat there, shaking, staring at my hands, my arms, my legs, everything suddenly feeling wrong, like my body wasn't mine, like I had been violated in some way I couldn't comprehend, like something had touched me, held me, breathed against my skin, and I had never known. The sun was rising outside, warm light creeping in through the blinds, but it didn't reach me, it didn't touch the deep, hollow cold inside me as I sat there, frozen, because I knew one thing for certain, whatever it wasn't just watching me. It was getting closer. I didn't sleep that night, wouldn't, every time I closed my eyes I felt it, the weight of something beside me, the warmth of something that wasn't me, the whisper I hadn't heard but had felt, pressing against my ear, breathing me in, and I sat there with every light on, the TV playing nonsense. My phone still open to the video, but I couldn't bring myself to watch it again. I didn't need to, because I could still see it in my head. The slow shift of the sheets, the press of unseen fingers, the ripple of the mattress as something climbed out of bed. As if it had always been there. As if it would always be there. I forced myself to move when the sun rose, forced myself to go through the motions of normalcy, brushing my teeth with a hand that trembled, drinking coffee that tasted like nothing, walking through my apartment like it still belonged to me. But it didn't. I knew that now. I had been sharing it, sharing my bed, my space, my body without knowing, and it made me sick, made my skin feel foreign, made my reflection in the mirror seem wrong. And then, as I stepped back into my bedroom, I saw it, the bed, the sheets, wrong again, rumpled, stretched, the pillow beside mine slightly indented, as if someone had been lying there and had just gotten up. My stomach twisted, the air leaving my lungs in a short, sharp exhale, because I knew I hadn't slept, hadn't touched the bed, hadn't so much as brushed against the blankets, but it had moved. I ran cold water over my hands, my wrists, my face, trying to steady myself, trying to think, trying to make sense of what was happening. But there was no sense to be made, because I was not alone. That night I set up another camera, not just my phone, but a second one, borrowed an old camcorder from a friend, propped them both at different angles, covered all my bases, because if I was going to lose my mind, if I was going to fall apart, I needed to see it happen, needed to know that I wasn't imagining this, that something was in my bed. I lay down, stiff as a corpse, every nerve in my body screaming, exhaustion weighing down on me but fear keeping me wired, and eventually, somehow, I drifted into a light, uneasy sleep, and when I woke up, I felt it immediately. The cold, empty space beside me, the sheets disturbed, the lingering heat that wasn't mine, and I turned to the cameras with my heart in my throat, fingers fumbling to rewind the footage, my breath hitching, catching, and then, at exactly 3:12 a.m., the bed moved. The sheets depressed, not all at once, not suddenly, but slow, gradual, as if something was settling in, pressing down, curling up beside me. My body stiffened in my sleep, my breathing changing, reacting to something I couldn't see, couldn't fight, and then, slowly, unbearably slowly, the blanket began to pull away again, revealing my throat, my chest, my hands resting still at my sides, and then a shape. Not clear, not fully formed, but something in the air, something distorting the space beside me. A ripple, a presence, something shifting the light in a way that wasn't natural, like heat haze or a smudge on glass. But it was moving. It was leaning in. It was pressing close, watching me. And then the whisper, soft, right against my ear. This time I heard it. "You're finally awake." The blankets ripped away, and the video cut to black. I don't remember turning off the camera, don't remember stopping the recording, don't remember anything after the screen cut to black, just the overwhelming, gut-wrenching sense of wrongness that settled into my body like a sickness. Like something had touched me in the night and I hadn't been able to stop it, and I sat there, staring at the dead screen, my fingers digging into my thighs, my breath shallow, my skin crawling with the unbearable sensation of being watched. And then I saw it. The bed, the sheets still wrong, still indented beside me like someone had just been there, like someone had just left, and my stomach twisted so violently I thought I might be sick. Because the warmth was still there, fresh, lingering, it had been there, it had been right beside me, it had been real. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the camera as I rewound the footage, scrubbing back through the hours, my pulse pounding in my ears as I forced myself to look, to see. And there it was again, 3:12 a.m., the blanket pulling away, the shape, the distortion, the way the air itself seemed to warp, something invisible but solid moving against me, pressing against me, touching me, and then the whisper, "You're finally awake." The words twisted into my skull like a parasite, cold, deliberate, something sentient, aware, waiting. I shoved the camera away, bolted from the bed, my body slick with sweat, my skin crawling like something unseen was still clinging to it, and as I stumbled into the bathroom, gripping the sink to keep from collapsing, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror and my breath caught. My reflection. It wasn't right. It was me, but it wasn't. The eyes were mine, but slightly too wide, slightly too dark, something lurking beneath the surface, and the longer I stared, the more I saw it. The faintest indentation on the side of my neck, just below my ear, as if something had been pressed there, as if something had been breathing against my skin. My stomach lurched, bile rising in my throat, because I knew, it hadn't just been lying beside me, it had been close. It had been touching me. And then, from the bedroom behind me, just out of sight, the sound of sheets rustling, like someone settling back into bed, like someone waiting for me to return, like someone who had always been there. And then a whisper from inside the room, "Come back to bed." I ran. I have lived in this house for 3 years. I know every inch of it, every creaky floorboard, every drafty window, every weird little imperfection that comes with an old home. So when I stepped into the hallway last night and saw a door that wasn't supposed to be there, I stopped breathing. It was just there, at the end of the hall, where there had never been anything before, the same wooden paneling as the other doors, slightly ajar, a thin sliver of darkness visible between the gap, and the worst part was, I knew it hadn't been there before. I knew it because I had walked down this hallway 1,000 times, I had lived here, and there had never been a door. But now there was. And it was open. A slow, sinking dread pulled in my stomach as I took a step closer, my heartbeat too loud in my ears, my breath coming shallow because I could feel something beyond that threshold, something wrong, and the closer I got, the more I was certain I could hear breathing. Soft, slow, deliberate. Coming from the darkness behind the door. I wanted to run, every muscle in my body tensed with instinctive terror, but I couldn't. I just stood there, staring, listening, the cold draft from the open space brushing against my skin. And I realized then that it wasn't just the presence of the door that was wrong, it was the air. The temperature. Too cold, too still, like whatever was inside that room didn't belong here, like it had never belonged here. I reached out, my fingers trembling, pressing against the edge of the door, and I pushed, just slightly, widening the gap, the darkness swallowing the light from the hallway, and my stomach clenched as I whispered, "Hello?" The breathing stopped. Silence. A heavy, unnatural silence, like the house itself was holding its breath, like the world had gone still in anticipation, and then, a sound. A slow, shuffling movement, something heavy shifting in the darkness, something aware of me now. I staggered back, my breath caught in my throat, and as I did, the door moved. Not fully, not slammed, but eased open inch by something on the other side. And in the dim light of the hallway I saw it, a figure. Standing just inside the room. Tall. Unmoving. Watching me. And then, the whisper, "You shouldn't have seen this." The door slammed shut. And the hallway was empty. I stood there, frozen, staring at the empty hallway, at the place where the door had been, but it was gone, completely vanished as if it had never been there at all, nothing but the smooth, uninterrupted wall at the end of the corridor. But I knew what I had seen, I knew what I had heard, the breathing, the movement, the whisper, "You shouldn't have seen this." My skin prickled, my stomach twisting with something primal, something screaming at me to leave, to get out, but I couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stand there and listen to the silence, waiting for something to happen. For the door to come back, for the voice to return, for whatever was inside that impossible room to reach for me. But nothing happened. The house was still. My breath was loud, too loud, and I swallowed hard, forcing myself to step forward, my fingers grazing the spot where the door had been, and the wall was solid. Cold. Like it had always been there. Like I had imagined the whole thing. But I hadn't. I knew I hadn't. I barely slept that night, kept the hallway light on, sat awake in bed staring at the door to my room, waiting for something to change, for that feeling to return, but nothing did, nothing happened, and I told myself that maybe it had been a dream, a hallucination. My mind playing tricks on me, but deep down I knew. Something was wrong. And the house knew I had seen it. The next night, I hesitated before stepping into the hallway, my pulse thudding against my ribs, my breath shallow, my fingers twitching at my sides, because what if it was back? What if the door was waiting for me again, open just enough to let me see inside, to let me hear the breathing? I swallowed hard and stepped forward, inching my way toward the end of the hall, my body tight with tension, my skin crawling with unseen eyes, and when I reached it, I let out a slow, shaky breath. The wall was still there. No door. No sliver of darkness. Just smooth, solid wood where the impossible space had been. And then the floor creaked. Right behind me. I spun, my breath catching in my throat, but there was nothing there. Just the empty hallway, the dim glow of the light, the stillness pressing in around me, but I could feel it, something just out of reach, something just beyond my sight, something watching. My whole body went cold, and for a split second, I had the sickening urge to turn back, to press my hand against the wall, to knock. To see if the door would come back. And then, just as I took a step away, just as I forced myself to retreat toward my room, I heard it. A whisper. So quiet I almost missed it. "You're not supposed to be here." I slammed my door shut and didn't come out until morning. I didn't leave my room that night, didn't move, didn't breathe too hard, just sat in bed with my back pressed against the headboard, the blankets pulled up to my chest like they could somehow protect me, my ears straining for any sound, any shift in the air, any whisper, but the house was silent, too silent, the kind of silence that feels deliberate, watchful, and I knew, deep in my bones, that I wasn't alone, that even though the door had vanished, even though the hallway had returned to normal, something was still here. I barely slept, and when morning finally came, I forced myself to step out into the hallway, my skin prickling with the fear that the door would be there again, waiting for me. But it wasn't just the same unbroken wall, the same empty space, but the feeling of wrongness was still there, thicker now, heavier, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do, and I thought about leaving. Thought about packing a bag and driving away without looking back. But something, inside me, something I couldn't explain, whispered that it wouldn't matter, that the door would find me again, that it had already marked me, already noticed me, and even if I left, I would wake up one night in some distant hotel room, in someone else's house, in a place I thought was safe, and I would see it again, slightly open, waiting. I went to work, went through the motions of normalcy, tried to drown out the unease with coffee and conversation, but the feeling followed me, clung to me like a second skin, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. The dark space beyond the door, the figure standing inside, unmoving, watching. When I came home that evening, I hesitated before unlocking the door, my hand hovering over the handle, dread coiling tight in my stomach, and when I finally stepped inside, I felt it immediately. Something was different. The air was heavier, the shadows longer, and I didn't know how, I didn't know why, but I could feel it, the way you can feel a storm before it breaks, the way you can feel a pair of unseen eyes staring at the back of your head. I turned on every light, checked every room, avoided the hallway, but no matter where I went, no matter how loud I made the TV, how much I tried to ignore it, the feeling remained, pressing against me, around me, inside me. And then, at exactly 3:12 a.m., I woke up. No reason, no sound, just the abrupt, bone-deep certainty that something was wrong. The room was quiet, the lights I had left on still glowing softly, but my body was rigid, every muscle locked in place, every nerve screaming, and I knew without even looking, the door was back. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry, my pulse hammering so hard I could feel it in my teeth, and slowly, so slowly, I turned my head toward the hallway. It was there, wide open. The darkness beyond it felt alive, pulsing, shifting, and as I lay there, unable to move, unable to scream, I saw something step out. Tall, wrong, unnatural, and it was coming toward me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't make a sound, just lay there frozen as the thing stepped out of the doorway, slow, deliberate, like it had been waiting for this moment, like it had been waiting for me, and as it moved into the dim light, I saw it fully for the first time. Tall, impossibly tall, its head nearly grazing the ceiling, its limbs too long, too thin, its body wrapped in something dark, something shifting, like it wasn't made of skin but of shadow, like it wasn't a thing at all but the absence of a thing, a void where a person should be, where a face should be, but there was no face, just a smooth, empty space where features should have been, where eyes should have been, but I could feel it looking at me, could feel its attention sinking into my skin, into my bones, a suffocating, pressing weight, like the air itself was crushing me down into the mattress, like I was sinking into something deep and endless and cold. My breath came in short, sharp gasps, my pulse a wild, erratic hammer in my chest, because it was moving closer now, its head tilting slightly, its empty knot face studying me, and then it did something worse, something that made my stomach drop, my body lock up in sheer, helpless terror. It reached out. A long, spindly hand, fingers too many, too thin, stretching toward me, hovering just inches from my face, and I wanted to scream, wanted to run, wanted to do anything but lie there paralyzed, trapped in my own body, trapped in this nightmare that wasn't a nightmare, and then, it touched me. Cold. Not like ice, but like nothing at all, like my skin wasn't feeling anything but an absence, like the space where it touched me simply ceased to exist, and for a single, unbearable moment, I felt it inside me, not on me but in me, pressing into my skin, into my chest, like it was sinking into me, threading through me, its long fingers curling over my ribs, over my throat, holding me down, and then, the whisper. Not in my ear this time. In my head. You don't belong here. And just like that, it was gone. The pressure lifted, the cold vanished, the air returned to the room all at once, like I had been drowning and suddenly surfaced, and I gasped, sucking in air so fast I nearly choked on it, my body shuddering violently as I bolted upright. The sheets damp with sweat, my skin still tingling with the ghost of that touch, but the door was gone, the hallway was empty, nothing had changed except I knew it had. Because I could still feel it. Somewhere in the house. Somewhere in me. And I knew it would come back. Because it had never really left. I first noticed it my third night in the house, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the creaks and groans of the old wood settling, the way every house shifts in the night when everything is still, but this was different. Not just the usual sighs of an aging home, not just the wind pressing against the walls, this was rhythmic, deliberate, like a long, slow inhale, like the house itself was breathing. I sat up, pulse quickening, ears straining, waiting for another sound, another explanation, but then exhale. A deep, hollow release, not from outside, not from the vents, but from underneath me, from the floors, from the walls, and suddenly I wasn't in bed anymore, wasn't even thinking, just moving, throwing back the blankets, pressing my feet against the cold hardwood, and the second I did, I felt it, a vibration, faint but steady, like something shifting beneath me. My stomach clenched, a slow, creeping unease curling in my chest, and I crouched down, pressing my palm flat against the floorboards, my breath catching in my throat because they were moving, rising, lifting under my hand as if something was swelling beneath them, expanding, filling with air. I jerked back, heart hammering, while rising in my throat, because I knew houses don't do that, houses don't breathe. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, that I was overtired, that I had let my mind twist normal sounds into something worse, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I felt it, the inhale, the exhale, the slow, rhythmic pulse of the house beneath me. And I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't random, it wasn't natural, it was aware. The next night, I stayed awake, lying stiff in bed, waiting, listening, my body coiled tight with tension, every inch of me on edge, and just as the clock on my nightstand flicked over to 3:12 a.m., it started again, inhale. The floor beneath me rising, the walls groaning, the sound of something shifting deep inside the house, expanding, filling, waiting. I forced myself to move, to swing my legs over the side of the bed, to kneel and press my ear to the floor, my pulse a slow, heavy drumbeat, my breath shallow, my hands trembling, and that's when I heard it, a sigh. Not the house. Not the wood. Something deeper. Something beneath me. Something alive. I jerked back so fast I nearly fell, my body ice cold, my limbs weak with terror, because I hadn't imagined it, I had heard it. A low, deep exhale from underneath the floorboards, like something huge and hidden had just released a breath it had been holding. As if it knew I was listening. I didn't sleep that night. And when morning came, the house was silent again. Like it was waiting for the dark. Like it was waiting for me. I didn't tell anyone because how do you explain something like that? How do you say out loud that your house is breathing, that you can hear it exhaling in the dark, that you can feel it moving beneath you like a living thing, like something with lungs, something with weight? Something that is awake? They would think I was crazy, maybe I was imagining it, but I wasn't, I knew I wasn't, so the next night I stayed up again, I sat on the floor with my back against the bed, legs pulled to my chest, my body braced and waiting, and when the clock hit 3:12 a.m. it started again, inhale. Long, slow, deliberate, the floor rising under my hands, the walls stretching, groaning, and I sat there, frozen, my heart pounding as I pressed my ear to the wood, my breath shallow, and this time I wasn't just listening, I was waiting for it to hear me back. The exhale came slower this time, drawn out, deliberate, like it was listening to, like it was aware of me now, and just as I started to pull away, just as my skin broke out in a cold, clammy sweat, I heard it, something shifting. Not the breath this time, something deeper. A faint, scraping sound, like nails dragging against wood, like something moving beneath the house. I scrambled back, my spine hitting the edge of the bed, my breath catching in my throat because I had heard it, something was underneath me. I didn't sleep. I didn't move. I just sat there, staring at the floor, waiting for it to happen again, but the house stayed silent, still, as if it knew I was afraid, as if it was waiting for me to break first. Morning came slow and heavy, the air in the house thick with something unseen, and I told myself I had to check, I had to look, I had to prove to myself that there was nothing down there, nothing beneath me, that I was making it up. That I was losing my mind and not just witnessing something I wasn't meant to. So I went to the basement. I had only been down there once when I moved in, just a quick look, an unfinished space, damp and cold concrete floors, wooden beams stretching across the ceiling. The kind of place that felt like it had never been touched. Like no one had ever really used it for anything. But as I opened the door now, as I took the first step down, I felt it immediately. The air was wrong. Heavier. Tighter. Like stepping into a lung that had just finished inhaling. I swallowed hard, gripping the railing as I made my way down, my stomach tight, my pulse too fast, my breath too loud, and the deeper I went, the more I felt it, the weight of something pressing down on me, around me, inside me. And then I saw the floor. Not the concrete, the wood. Wide, heavy wooden planks stretched across the entire basement, dark and warped with age. But I knew basements weren't built like that. Basements were supposed to be solid, not covered, not sealed. My throat tightened. My hands slick with sweat as I stepped closer. My feet making the faintest creaking sound. And suddenly, I knew. This wasn't a floor. It was a lid. Something was underneath. And the house had been breathing around it. I stood there, my feet planted on the warped wooden planks that shouldn't be there, my breath shallow, my hands trembling at my sides because I could feel it now, the slow, deliberate rise beneath me, the way the air seemed to pulse with the movement, the deep inhale stretching the floor ever so slightly, lifting under my weight, and my stomach clenched because I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't dreaming, the house was breathing, something beneath me was breathing, and the thought made my skin go tight, my knees weak, because if the floor wasn't a floor, what was underneath it? I didn't want to know, I didn't want to find out, but my body wasn't listening. My hand was already reaching forward, fingers curling around the edge of one of the planks. my heart hammering so hard I could barely hear my own breath. And as I gave the board a tentative tug, it shifted. Not nailed down. Not secured. Loose. I swallowed hard, while rising in my throat, because something in me whispered that I shouldn't be doing this, that this was a mistake, that there were things in this world you weren't meant to see, but my fingers were already prying beneath the wood, already pulling, and as the board lifted free with a soft groan of protest, the air in the basement changed. It was subtle at first, just a faint pressure, like stepping into a room that had been waiting to be opened, but then, the exhale. A long, slow release of air from below, warm and damp, rising up through the gap like breath on my skin, and I jerked back so fast I almost lost my balance because I could smell it, a thick, rotting scent that didn't belong, that had been trapped beneath the wood for God knows how long, something ancient, something that had been sealed away, and I had just let it out. My stomach churned, my vision tilting, but I couldn't stop, couldn't look away, and as I forced myself to shine my flashlight into the dark, into the space beneath the floorboards, my breath hitched in my throat because I saw something move. Not a rat, not pipes, something big. A shifting mass just beneath the surface. Something writhing, something alive. My pulse slammed into my ribs, my legs locked, my fingers numb around the flashlight, because I could see it now, the way the wood around the opening was slick with something dark, something thick, something wet, and then the whisper. You shouldn't have opened it. The voice didn't come from above, didn't come from behind me, it came from beneath the floor. And then the breath stopped, like something was holding it in, like something was waiting. And then the boards around me began to lift. One by one, something was coming out. The wood groaned beneath me, slow and deliberate, rising in sections one by one, like something underneath was pushing upward, forcing its way through, and my breath caught in my throat. My whole body locked in place as I watched the boards shift, split apart, gaps widening between them like the mouth of something opening. I stumbled back, my flashlight trembling in my grip, the beam flickering over the dark space below, and I saw it again, movement, not frantic, not hurried, but slow, controlled, something shifting just beneath the surface, something awakening, and then the breath came back. A long, deep inhale, pulling at the air, at the room, at me like the whole house was drawing me in, and my chest tightened, my lungs seized, my vision blurred at the edges because I could feel it now, could feel the way the walls seemed to pulse in rhythm, the floorboards flexing under my feet, and then I heard it again, the whisper. Stay. Not a suggestion. Command. And then I saw the hand. It came up between the slats of wood, long and pale and too thin, fingers pressing against the boards as if testing them, as if feeling the air for the first time in a long, long time, and I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, because I knew I had made a mistake. I had opened something that was never meant to be opened. My flashlight flickered, the dim glow catching more movement beneath the boards. Not just a hand. More. Many more. Fingers curling, shifting, pressing against the planks like they were testing their strength, like they were getting ready to push, and then, slowly, deliberately, one hand gripped the edge of the open gap, and it started pulling itself up. I ran. I don't remember getting up the stairs, don't remember slamming the basement door behind me, don't remember locking it, my hands shaking so violently I could barely get the latch in place, but suddenly I was upstairs, panting, trembling, staring at the door like it was going to explode open at any second, and then, I felt it, the inhale. The house was breathing harder now, and I could feel it everywhere. The walls shifted, the floor swelled, the air was thick, heavy, pressing against me from all sides, like I was inside something alive, something that had just woken up hungry. My legs barely worked, my vision swam, and all I could hear was my own breath, shallow and ragged, mixing with the slow, rhythmic inhale-exhale of the house, pulling me deeper, holding me inside it. And then, from everywhere at once, the whisper came again. You should not have let us out. The lights flickered, the walls expanded, and the basement door started to open.